So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arnold Bryan. We're going to go through Enginius as a teaching platform for marketing analytics. And this webinar is mostly dedicated to first-time instructors, but hopefully if you have some experience with Enginius already, we are also going to give you some tips and tricks about how to use it in a more advanced manner. So in today's webinar, we are going to cover basically 4 topics. Number one, a brief introduction to what Enginius is all about and what's in it for you. Then we'll talk about the philosophy of Enginius, which is about making the software disappear so that you can focus your attention and your students' attention on the decision to make and not on the technicalities of the case study. Then we'll do a bit more advanced feature of Enginius, which is using Enginius interactively in the classroom with your own students to demonstrate marketing analytics capabilities and involve them in the demonstration in real time. And then finally, we'll talk about how to make Enginius collaborative, especially if you want to work with the students in smaller groups. How can you use Enginius to make them work together and come up with solutions together, and even data sets, as we'll see in our example. So let's begin by a brief introduction of what the platform is all about. What's in it for me in Enginius? Enginius is an online marketing analytics platform. It doesn't require any software installation. It works equally well on Mac and on PC. Originally, it was designed by Gary Lillian, Arvind Ragaswamy, and myself. And if you've been around for a few years, you maybe know the name Marketing Engineering, which is the platform, the legacy platform that was before Enginius. So Enginius is an online marketing analytics platform where you have a collection of models you can use, from the most common ones, segmentation, positioning, conjoint analysis, to more recent and modern ones like sentiment analysis or network analysis. But most importantly, it includes more than 30 case studies that you can use immediately from within the platform. So the case studies and the platform are, and the analytic capabilities are fully integrated into one platform, which obviously makes an instructor's life much easier. The website also contains tons of resources, from slides you can borrow, to videos you can use, to templates you can generate, to use your own data. And importantly, as long as your students do not touch it, it's completely free for you. So what we mean is that you can actually log into the platform, run a demonstration in class, and you don't need to pay anything. You can go to the website and download the slides. You don't need to pay anything. So basically, we are instructors ourselves, and we know sometimes how hard it is to develop or enrich an existing course. And so we've made available a lot of the teaching resources we've designed over the years for instructors, and they're free to use. All you need to do is to register. So let me show you a few things about the Enginius platform. This is what it looks like. You have, and of course, I explain how to get there and how to use it in more details, but just as a quick overview, the Enginius platform has a bunch of models you can use from, so 12 of them right now: segmentation, positioning, conjoint analysis, and so on. You have a very long list of case studies which are available to run on the Enginius platform, from GE matrix case studies to resource allocation to customer lifetime value, and so on. And then, of course, you have additional resources such as tutorials and templates, which we'll revisit in a few minutes. So for instance, if you'd like to learn more about segmentation and you don't know which case study you want to use yet, you can open the tutorial, click on segmentation, and you have an example data set, a very simple data set you can use to run the segmentation analysis, and everything you need to know about the software, the segmentation software is explained in a tutorial which is available online and directly from the platform as well. And if you'd like to know what segmentation does, you simply open the tutorial, click segmentation, run segmentation analysis, which is exactly the same as this button over here. For all tutorials and all case studies, default options have been selected. So you just need to open the model, click run, and you have at least an idea of the kind of report that Enginius will generate for you, in this case for segmentation analysis. And it goes, of course, in full details. We're not going to review each model one by one, but as you can see, the reports can be pretty rich and support significant class discussions later on. So that's what the platform looks like. If you'd like to gain access to it, the first thing you need to do is to register as an instructor. Okay, and so basically, if you go to instructors, okay, let me log out first. If you go to instructors and you click instructor registration, that's basically the form you need to fill in to have access to Enginius and all the resources attached to that. Of course, as an instructor, you have access to a lot of resources. You also have access to case solutions. So once you register as an instructor, we need to vet you and make sure that you are legitimate instructors, because of course, no student has ever tried to gain access to these resources. And so give us like 24 hours, maybe 2 days at most, to double check who you are and make sure we have access to you and that you are legit instructors to have that. Now, once you have registered and logged in as an instructor, you have tons of resources you can have access to from the Enginius software, of course, but also a list of case studies. You can get the textbook in PDF format. You can get access to teaching slides. We also have a bunch of video libraries that we have recorded over time on RFM regression models or some specific case studies and so on. So all these videos are available to you as long as you are a registered instructor. Otherwise, you won't be able to access them. Now, of course, I mean, 12 models, 30 case studies, 50 videos, it could be a bit overwhelming, right? And so if you'd like to navigate the Enginius resources based on what you teach, actually one interesting approach is to click on instructors, and on the right-hand side, you have a list of courses in which marketing analytics are widely used. So imagine that you are teaching business-to-business marketing. If you teach business-to-business marketing, there are a few models that we believe are particularly appropriate for your use, such as segmentation, conjoint analysis, widely used in B2B as well, value-based pricing, and then resource allocation. Okay, imagine that you want to learn more about resource allocation. You click here, and not only you can try resource allocation directly, it gives you access to the Enginius software from there, but also it gives you a few pointers of the capabilities of the software, as well as the case studies that you could use to teach resource allocation in your business-to-business class. So for instance, imagine you say, okay, let's explore the John French call plan case study, which is a resource allocation case study very well suited to teach for business to business classes. You have a quick description of what the case study is all about. And if you click open the case study in Enginius, you are immediately redirected to the Enginius platform and the case study itself, which will open directly. So, of course, it takes a few seconds. Here we are. Okay, and this is what the case study is all about, right? With the case study in PDF format, also the case solution. Obviously, it was not the case in the tutorial, but when you open a case study, you have access to, at the same time, the case study in PDF format, which is what students have access to with all the problem description and questions they need to answer to, but also you have access to the case solution in PDF format, which gives you all the information you need to guide and drive discussions in the classroom about that case study, including how to teach the case, a few things to keep in mind, what are the solutions to the questions, and so on, what kind of options you need to click on to reach the same solution and so on. Okay, so that's basically what the Enginius platform is all about. A lot of marketing analytic capabilities, 30+ case studies, and all the teaching and pedagogical environment required to make those case studies come to life in your classroom as efficiently as possible. Now, of course, having access to these case studies and these marketing analytic capabilities in the classroom is one thing, but we know that, especially with today's students, there are a few pedagogical challenges, right? In terms of attention span, in terms of getting them motivated, in terms of they also expect more interactivity in the classroom than students did like 10 or 20 years ago. And so to that avail, I'm going to share with you 3 tips about how to use Enginius in the classroom to make your teaching experience as efficient as possible. And the first thing I'd like to talk about, I'd like to talk about is how to make Enginius disappear. What do I mean by that? I'm going to show you just one example, one case study of a segmentation case study. And it's called the ESSEC Business School MBA segmentation case study. The idea is quite simple. The school has interviewed about 200 executive education participants and asked them what they were doing there. What were their motivations to join the program in terms of networking, reputation of the school? Do they want to change company after their executive MBA? Are they here to acquire academic knowledge, and so on and so forth? And these respondents are described in terms of gender, country of origin, age, experience, and whether they are partly or fully financed by their employer to participate to that executive education program. Now, of course, as in any case study, you can run the segmentation analysis. You have the case study in PDF format for the students, and then you have the case solution as well, where we go into great details about the segmentation solution, why X number of segments is better than others, and how you could describe even each segment one by one. We even give you the slides for using them in the classroom. Now, what do I mean by making Enginius disappear? What I often do in the classroom is this. I show how many clicks it takes to run the segmentation case study. Okay, and so I'm going to start fresh and count with you how many clicks it takes to run from A to Z the entire segmentation case study. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's all it takes. 4 clicks, and you basically have, in this case, a 2-segment solution report that goes into great details about what these segments are, what their preferences are, how they differ from one another, and so on and so forth. Now, if you want to go a little bit more into details, you can say, okay, instead of a 2-segment solution, I'm going to run a 4-segment solution. And actually, I can even create a PowerPoint slide directly from Enginius. I'm going to explain to you why it's so important to explain that to your students. So I'm going to force to 4 segments. And then I'm going to say, okay, I want the report to be in PowerPoint format, right? Left to the run button, you have a small arrow, and you can select in which format you'd like the output to be created. By default, it's a web page like I've used so far, but you can actually create an Excel spreadsheet or PDF file or PowerPoint presentation. And if I run the analysis, this is the report that is going to be generated for me. And it's going to open here. That's what it looks like. Okay. It created a 40-slide PowerPoint deck automatically in a few clicks. And so I show that to my students, and I tell them, how many points do you think you'll get by just getting the output? How many points do you think it's worth to be able to log into Enginius, click on 4 buttons, and get a 40-page PowerPoint presentation? Obviously, what I expect from you is not to generate a report. What I expect from you is to analyze the report and make sense of it and transform that into managerially relevant decision-making and recommendations. I want to act you as consultants using the input of Enginius or the output of Enginius as feeding your decision-making process. And that's actually very powerful to show them in class. It only takes a few clicks to do that, because then they understand, okay, there is no credit for running the analysis. All the credit comes from analyzing the results. And I think making that very clear and making Enginius so easy to use that you could generate a 40-page report in 4 clicks is actually key in terms of pedagogical value of the platform. Because suddenly students realize that running analytics is kind of easy when you have everything in place, but actually understanding what these analytics mean and transform that into a decision-making process is actually much harder. And that's what all the case studies are all about. So basically making Enginius disappear in the sense that making the platform so easy to use that people don't even need to think about it anymore, but instead focus on how to use the output to make better decisions and help managers make better decisions is actually key, at least in the way many of us are teaching with Enginius in the classroom. Now, the second tip I'd like to talk to you about is how to make Enginius more interactive. So making Enginius interactive is essential in today's teaching environment. And the reason is that students expect more interactivity in the classroom than they used to a few years ago. So you need to involve them in the analytical process to grab their attention and make them more involved in what you're teaching. I'm going to show you just one example among many possible of how to make your teaching more interactive with students. And one example I'm going to use is conjoint analysis. Conjoint analysis Now, of course, we have plenty of complex case studies and simpler tutorials to explain how conjoint analysis works. But conjoint analysis at its core is a way to measure how people make trade-offs, right? Everybody would like a smaller price, everybody would like higher quality, but when you have to trade off between price and quality, everybody is different. And conjoint analysis is going to quantify that through analytics and help, for instance, managers build better products or better price the product they have in the marketplace, or better understand which products are competing or cannibalizing one another. But it's pretty abstract, right? If you think about conjoint analysis, quantifying preferences is a bit abstract. So what I do very often when I introduce conjoint analysis in the classroom is actually to run a conjoint analysis in real time with one student in the class. So at the beginning, I work with the entire group, okay? And I say, look, we're going to run a conjoint analysis on which cans of soda you like and what kind of attributes are important to you when you decide whether to buy or not a can of soda, like Pepsi, Coke, Fanta, whatever, okay? And to do that interactively in the classroom, I'm going to use a feature of Enginius, which is called template generation. Template generation is allowing you to create placeholders to put exactly the kind of data you need to run any kind of analysis, such as bad forecasting or segmentation. In my case, conjoint analysis. So conjoint analysis is a two-step process. I understand it's a two-step process. And the first one is to design the conjoint environment. How many attributes, which levels, and so on. So I'm going to do that here with you, very simple case study. And again, a very simple demonstration. And again, I'm going to use a very simple design, 3 attributes, up to 3 levels per attribute. I'm not going to fill with random data. And so I turn to my class and say, okay, imagine you have to choose between different kinds of sodas. What kind of attributes would you use, right, to describe those products? And of course, people will say, well, price is an obvious one, sure. And then someone will invariably say taste. I'd say, okay, so how do you describe the taste of Pepsi versus the taste of Coke? And then suddenly we realize, okay, taste is not a very good attribute. Maybe brand is a better one. So I'm going to use brand. And then, of course, sugar, right? And for each of these attributes, I'm going to select some values like $1, $1.50, and 2. Brand, I'm going to use Coke, Pepsi, and let's say Fanta. And then sugar, you have regular and diet. Now, that's my world. Right, that's how the cans in the distributor can be described in terms of prices, brand, and sugar level. Now I'm going to create a survey in real time in the classroom based on that conjoint design. So I go back to the template, conjoint analysis. I understand that now I'm at step 2. Now, because I'm at step 2 and I've used the template before, Enginius remembers that I've already created a conjoint design and it's over there. And in this case, I'm going to use just one respondent. Okay, and I create a template for data collection, if you will, except that in this situation, I'm going to collect data with only one individual. And I'm going to ask that individual, by the way, do you think you are price sensitive? Or do you prefer Coke to Pepsi? Or how much more are you willing to pay to get a Diet Coke instead of a regular Coke, if you prefer diet? So I'm going to ask them all these questions before we even begin collecting data. And sometimes I take notes on the whiteboard to remember what they said, right? And then I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to describe 11 different products from 1 to 11. I'm going to ask you to give me a score on a 0 to 100 or 0 to 10 or 1 to 5, whatever scale that describes to what extent you like that product. So, for instance, a regular Coke at $1.5, well, I prefer Pepsi, I prefer Diet, 1.5 is middle range, I'm going to give it a 20. And then regular Pepsi at 1, actually much better, 75, right? And so on and so forth. Now, of course, here I'm not going to fill out the entire survey in front of you, but that's basically how you do that. And then, of course, you ask at the end the respondents, your students, whether it's coherent with their preferences, whether they want to change something. Now, interestingly, by the time you reach the 11th profile, the students will be bored and everybody will be, which is good because that's actually a nice segue to explain why conjoint analysis data collection is so time consuming and boring, and why we've invented so many ways of collecting conjoint data differently, from adaptive conjoint to choice-based conjoint and so on, okay? Or partial profiles, conjoint estimation. That's a nice explanation of why we actually needed to do that, and otherwise students would not understand why it's so important. Now, interestingly, once a student has filled out these preferences, and of course here I have mostly random data, you can run conjoint analysis and estimate their preference part worth. And again, because you use the template, everything is pre-filled by default, because Enginius knows exactly as if it were a pre-encoded case study. We know where the conjoint design is, we know what kind of survey you've run, that profiles are being rated, and so on and so forth. And if you run the analysis, in a few seconds, we'll have a conjoint report showing the preference part worth of that one respondent in your classroom. And what I would usually do then is to compare those preference part worth to what he claimed was important to them, right? In terms of price sensitivity or diet and so on. Now, of course, here the preference part worth are nonsensical because, again, it's mostly driven by randomness. But for instance, if he said, okay, I much prefer diet, and then you realize that they're actually extremely price sensitive, you could say, okay, so basically, if I ask you, you said diet is the most important one, but when we run through a conjoint analysis, we realize that actually you are much more price sensitive than what you said, and that's a bit unexpected. And so that whole demonstration takes about 5-10 minutes, maybe at most, in the classroom, but it shows, number one, the value and the perils of using conjoint analysis. But it's also a very nice segue to explain, look, this is how we get the data about one individual. Now, imagine instead of acquiring the data about one individual, we acquire the data about 200, and those 200 individuals are actually representative of a bigger marketplace. Then we can run simulations, and then we can enter into all the case studies we have where you can actually simulate market shares. You can run simulations, you can ask conjoint analysis to describe and identify the best products, new product that will capture the highest market share, and so on and so forth. But understanding how the preference data is collected to begin with is actually a very important first step in the understanding process. Now, the third thing I wanted to talk to you about is sometimes you'd like students to work in small groups for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, and then come back to the classroom with whatever they've learned. You can actually do that with Enginius. And these creates nice bubbles during your class where students work together. and come up with reports and analyses and insights that they can then share in class. And so having these small groups is a very nice way of creating interactivity in the classroom, involving them. It's hard not to work when you are in the classroom in a small group, and so on and so forth. And it works particularly well with executive education participants. So the next topic is make Enginius collaborative. That is, make Enginius work with small groups of students in real time. And to show you how it works, I'm going to use positioning analysis example. So positioning analysis is a way to understand how different products or companies or offerings are perceived by consumers on key attributes, and how these competitors are positioned against one another. So we have a lot of case studies about positioning analysis. One I like a lot is Heineken. It's a positioning analysis of different brands of beers in Spain, and I'm just going to show you the output in a few seconds. I'm going to make it simple and just run the perceptual map without preference data, so we can go to the core. And so you have a bunch of brands over here that have been rated on several attributes such as expensive, well-known, premium, winery, and these are the average perceptions of the market on all these brands. And based on these perceptions, we're going to show how brands are perceived similar to one another and competing with one another. So in this example, and again, I'm going to skip a few things. I'm going to go back to them very quickly, but here you can see that's the typical output of a positioning map where you have different brands positioned on the maps, and these brands are positioned along key attributes. So for instance, Heineken is at the same time perceived to be well positioned on that dimension and that dimension, right? So that dimension is Heineken is perceived to be a beer you drink to be seen, a beer which is expensive, international, pricey, the kind of beer you drink in nightclubs. And at the same time, it's an easy beer to drink. It's refreshing, youthful, smooth, watery. You find it easily. It's a well-known brand and so on, as opposed to Voldam, for instance, which is a much bitter beer. Now, of course, it would take a long time to go into the details of that case study, but that's basically what a positioning map looks like. And we can actually visualize that positioning map even in 3D as we do here. You can actually rotate the map and look at what the positioning maps look like in 3D and how these brands are positioned compared to one another. Now, what I often do, and it's a very powerful approach if you want to involve your students, I'm going to ask them to create their own positioning maps in small groups. And I would usually impose the topic, something that everybody is aware of. So here I'm going to use cars, for instance, and I'm going to ask them to work in small groups and create their own positioning maps, okay? So how do I do that? Well, imagine that you want to create a positioning map from scratch. What I would recommend you to do is to use a template. Again, a template will allow you to create placeholders so you know exactly where the data is. And on top of that, if you use the template feature, once you run the analysis, Enginius knows exactly where is what. And so it makes your life much easier down the road. So I'm going to create a template for positioning analysis. In this situation, I'm going to make it simple, no preference data. I'm going to fill it with random data just for this demonstration, but I don't do that in class. And sure, 7 brands, 9 attributes, sounds good. So you will ask your students to work in small groups of 3 or 4, And they have to decide, number one, which brands are going to be included. And number two, what attributes could best describe those brands. So for instance, they go back and the first exercise they have to make is to select up to, or maybe more, 7 brands. You can increase or decrease the number of brands, doesn't change anything as far as the template is concerned. So let's say I'm going to include Toyota, BMW, Ford, Mercedes, and so on. Okay, and of course I keep going. And then the second step is within each group, they have to decide which attributes best describe the automotive market. So for instance, you could say, okay, some brands are more expensive than others. Some seem to be more reliable than others. Some are driving machines, right? Some are comfortable. Some are better suited for family needs, etc., etc. Okay? And once they have described, once they have selected in small groups the brands, and once they have selected the attributes that they believe best describe that market, what they need to do next is to fill out that table as a group. Now, usually it's not how it's done. Usually every respondent will fill out the survey individually, and then we compute averages. But for the purpose of that exercise, it's actually not a bad idea to ask them to rate it as a group. So for instance, as a group, they will say, okay, Toyota is moderately expensive, BMW far more, Ford in between, Mercedes definitely, blah, blah, blah. And they fill out the survey like that. Now, what's interesting, it takes only a few minutes to fill out that matrix, right? Of course, they could discuss and disagree and have heated arguments, which, by the way, is a learning episode in and by itself, realizing that people have different perceptions. But usually they come up with an aggregate estimation of what these brands are perceived on and blah, blah, blah. And once it's done, what I will ask them to do is this. You click on positioning analysis, and you specifically, by the way, every option has been selected by default, again, because you've used a template. So for instance, the template knows you didn't select, you didn't include preference data, so it's not including one by default. And then I'm asking them to generate a PowerPoint file. By the way, the data you're going to see is completely nonsensical since 90% of the data is completely random. I asked them to create that PowerPoint file, store it locally, put their names on the first page, and then share it with me. And within half an hour, you can get 5 or 10 presentations that you can then review in class very quickly, okay? And show that in this instance, of course, again, remember, it's random data. You can compare different groups and say, okay, these groups decided to take those attributes and that group decided to take different attributes. Discuss, do you agree or don't you agree? Or some will include Tesla. Do you think Tesla is actually a competitor of classic Toyota cars, or is it an outsider? If it's an outsider, should it be included in the same perception map or not, and so on and so forth. And so suddenly you can go back and extremely quickly react and use students' data in your classroom to lead discussions about how do you select appropriate competitors, how do you best select the attributes, and so on and so forth. And the difference it makes that you are using your students' data is tremendous, because now students are looking at their own contribution to your course, and it sucks them in terms of attention and interest, especially if you are using I mean, in my experience, especially if you use executive education groups, you can even ask them to select a topic of their own, and with their own competitors and with their own attributes, and review them all. So it takes a bit more time if you ask them to come up with a topic by themselves, but within an hour, if you have 40 participants, you have, let's say, 8 groups, and within an hour, you have 8 PowerPoint presentations where you can discuss the pros and cons, the errors, the mistakes to not commit once you do a positioning map in real life. You can share the experience, and then also you can show to students that a positioning map, at least the basic version, can be generated in less than an hour. And it kind of demystifies marketing analytics and its usage in real life, especially for, again, executive education participants, involving them in small groups and making them come up with their own data and realize that they can analyze the data by a click of a button and gain insights in the process is actually a very, very powerful move from a pedagogical point of view to get them interested and involved. So basically, in terms of next steps, what I would personally encourage you to do is, number one, if you haven't done so, register as an instructor, because otherwise you cannot have access to anything. Explore the various resources available, especially use the menu to look at all the videos and tutorials and so on that are available on the course website. Experiment with the tutorials first, they're easier to use, and then select which case studies you'd like to use. And above all, feel free to contact us if you have any questions or recommendations. Again, we've collaborated with tons of instructors over the years, and what might seem a pretty tough question for you might be very simple to answer for us. So feel free to get back to us, and we'd be very happy to help you in your teaching needs.